Hi, this is the Data Science Barcelona podcast. It's a podcast intended for people starting their careers or just looking for their place as data scientists. And we're interviewing people from several backgrounds related to data science and with some connection to Barcelona. Today we are interviewing Pau de Jorge. We studied together in mathematics and physics, and then please go on and explain us your trajectory.
Okay. All right. So as you just said, I studied mathematics and physics. I I started with that because I wasn't so sure what I wanted to study, but
Oh,
I knew that I did like both mathematics and physics, and I wanted to have like a better understanding of how the universe works, and I was hoping to find some answers regarding that.
huh.
Um, and then during my career, during the university years, I started you know uh, becoming more and more interested in having more particular applications, not just very theoretical understanding, like theoretical physics or mathematics, which is very very abstract. So that's why I started doing some internships with companies where I started to really learn how to code. And well, not really, like I'm not I still don't consider myself a very professional coder, but at least I learned a bit, about programming and so on. um, so my first internship was about bioinformatics,
Mhm.
and we were trying to model how DNA bends and basically organizes um, inside the cell of the nucleus of the cells. So I always like this fact, to say this. Basically, the DNA, when you elongate a molecule of DNA, of human DNA, it's about 2 meters long, and
Oh,
it
wow.
fits all inside uh, a very 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 tiny space, right? um, so as you can imagine, it's really highly compacted, and depending on how it's organized, then it's gonna leave some parts more exposed or less exposed. So that's gonna affect how genes are expressed and so on. So it's kind of an interesting problem to model how DNA is organized. um, so I started doing that, and I that's when I started to get in touch with data science, machine learning. So I found these very powerful techniques that, well, or at least the idea of these techniques, where you would basically have an algorithm that sees a bunch of examples, like lots and lots of examples, um, and then learns from them, right? And learns to extract some meaningful information from that. So I really was interested about that. um, and then I decided to do another internship, because in mathematics and physics you have to do two undergraduate theses. So my
Yeah.
my other thesis was about neuroscience. So I was also trying to get this idea of how the brain works, and how, like, what is intelligence, or like well,
Yeah.
hard questions. um, and also there I also got interested in machine learning and data science. So I decided to do a master's. So then I went abroad. um, I basically went to Grenoble in France, where I did my master's in well, basically machine learning and applied mathematics. So it wasn't only machine learning, also a bit of statistics and so on. So then I would say that my first contact with what I'm doing now is probably more during my master's. So that's when I learned more about deep learning and computer vision and so on. So yeah, I really enjoyed my master's, and I was thinking about doing a PhD at the moment, but I wasn't so sure that I wanted to do research. Um, so I decided to go back to Barcelona, and then I worked for 2 years in a company, which is a startup named Satellogic.
With the
So
startup. Okay.
yeah, it's a startup. I mean, it's been a startup for some years now, so it's kind of a big startup.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's still considered a startup, I think. Well, so anyway, what they're trying to do is to build a satellite constellation. They already have several satellites on orbit, and basically, I think their plan is to get more than 200 satellites, and the idea is that what we were trying to do in our office of like the data science offices in Barcelona was to basically extract information automatically from those images, right? So basically, the satellites were pointing at the Earth and capturing photos. So the idea was to map the whole Earth um, every every day, basically, like when the whole satellite constellation is completed. And then the idea is, well, you've got a lot of information there, and you have to process it automatically. So my job there was to think about um, all the information that you can extract from those images and how you can apply it, and so on, right? So
Images,
I've been
right?
studying.
Only mainly images.
Yes, exactly. I mean, well, when you talk about satellites, it's not usually typical just RGB images, which is
Mhm.
like the images that you take with your phone or um, regular cameras. But they also have like they can include, like, depending on the sensors, uh, like they capture some other specific ranges of light. So for example, they capture near infrared, like several satellites, which is very good for detecting water and these kind of things. Um, yeah, and also other what they are called hyperspectral bands. So those are still images, but it's like you see in more colors, or you see the colors in more fine ways, right? So that can also give you interesting information. Okay, so basically there I developed several deep learning pipelines to process this kind of information. And finally now we come to the present, where I just started my DPhil in well, deep learning here at Oxford, the University of Oxford. So well, it's been quite quite an adventure
Yeah.
getting here. Um, yeah, so I don't know if
Yeah. Am I wrong if you did something in the Barcelona Supercomputing Center?
yeah. So when I was doing my first internship about bioinformatics, so when I was modeling the DNA molecules and so on, um, what I did was to, well, I mean, the lab where I worked had well, close relationship with a supercomputing center. So some simulations that they were doing in the group, they were done in the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. But in my case, most of them were in a local cluster that they had at the institute. Um,
Okay. So you mentioned you started with bioinformatics.
mhm.
Was it machine learning already, or you think what's the connection?
um, well, so I mean, initially when I started doing bioinformatics, I didn't do it because of machine learning. Like I didn't know the concept of machine learning yet. So it was more about, this cool problem in biology, and trying to do something more applied, right? So from a mathematical point of view or a physical point of view, but more applied to a real case problem. And then that's where I discovered. So basically, machine learning came up when we basically wanted to predict, there's some areas in the DNA which are free of nucleosomes. They are called nucleosome free regions, right? So well, I don't want to enter into a lot of details,
Perfectly
but
fine.
basically nucleosomes are some kind of particles that the DNA wraps around. So basically these kind of areas are interesting because they will, yeah, did I explain correctly?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so basically to predict these nucleosome free regions, uh, we had some ideas of what were the variables that could influence. But we thought, okay, let's try, instead of having a very complex model to kind of average all of these variables together, let's see what we can do with machine learning, right, to predict
Mm.
whether a region is going to be a nucleosome free region or not.
And that was
Um,
your thesis.
yes, and that was basically my thesis in mathematics.
And you had an honor qualification, maybe, or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Um, so another question I have is like, in what moment do you decide you're going to Oxford? It's a big move, right?
Hmm. So when did I decide it?
Yes. Why or like?
Hmm. Um, so it's a it's a convergence of a lot of things. So on the one side, it was a great opportunity. So as I said, when I finished my master's, I wasn't so sure I wanted to do the field, like a PhD.
Okay.
um, so I decided to work for a bit in a company. In Satellogic, I learned a lot about deep learning and programming. So it's more like hands-on experience, and I thought that was also a very enriching experience. But I felt like, to be really proficient in deep learning, um, it's really good to really dive deep into the field and do a PhD. Um, and also, well, when I got the opportunity to go there, uh, I was really thrilled. um, and yeah, basically that's why I decided. Also, in terms of personal life, it also converged that my partner could find something there
Right.
to do. So I mean, we decided, uh, okay, like this is a good move.
Yeah, that's lucky because perhaps maybe some people it's just not moving because of partners or something. Um, so is it hard to get the visa there? Or this is a side question apart from data science, but I'm curious to know.
The visa, like
Yeah, visa, the permit to live there, work
well, I
there.
mean, for European
Yeah,
students, it's actually right now you
right.
don't need anything. After Brexit, we'll see. But right
Okay,
now, it's yeah, it's really not a problem. If you came from, I don't know, India or some other place, then yes,
super.
you need to apply for a visa.
Okay, so let's go with the next question. Um, what institutions are you happy to have applied to, or like you've been through some institutions? Would you like to mention some people or some place you just made a change?
Mhm. I mean, I guess that so for one hand, the University of Barcelona, I think it was, a very interesting experience. Like the background that I have on how to think, more mathematically, analytically, or whatever comes from the, I would say, from mathematics and physics. But I guess to get me to Oxford, what really made the difference was my master's in Grenoble. So to be honest, when I applied for that master's, I wasn't aware that there's really a very strong group in computer vision there. Um, but well, I just applied and got accepted and got a scholarship, and I was super happy. But then the second part, so there's 2 semesters, so it was 1 year for the masters, and the second semesters you had to do a 6-month internship with a
Oh,
research group. And then again, I was also hesitating whether should I try to do, an internship in a research group, or should I go to a company? Because so far I had only been doing internships in research groups, so I only knew this research part. And I wanted to try a little bit of industry as well, so I wasn't sure. But in the end, I got a group that I found a group that caught my attention, which was doing deep learning and so on. And I applied to see what happened, and I did the interview with with the guy that ended up being my supervisor for my master thesis. Um, and I don't know, like we kind of got along very well, and then I really found the project interesting. So I said, okay, let's try this. I think I'm gonna learn a lot, and it's gonna be interesting. And yeah, later on I found out that, in the field of computer vision, well, for those of you who know, I did the internship with Cordelia Schmidt. So uh, well, that basically later opened, I would say, some doors
okay.
for me. uh, so yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned the University of Barcelona and the theoretical background.
Hmm?
What percentage of what you studied in your bachelor's degree would you say you're applying today?
Oof, that's really hard.
Yeah,
um, I'm gonna go with 50%, and
I think that's a lot.
I think that's a lot, yes. So, but still, yeah, I mean, I think in research, um, maybe you don't use all of the things or all of the tools that you learn in mathematics, but at least, the fact that you have learned to read through a proof and kind of think in this way. Okay, yeah, probably it's not 50%, it's less, but
Okay,
let's go with that. Yeah.
but is it replaceable though?
Is it replaceable? I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, so if you want to do deep learning, you definitely don't need to have studied mathematics or physics, so you can
Okay.
do deep learning coming from a lot of different backgrounds. But I think it does help to understand a bit more in detail what are the algorithms doing, and yeah.
Mhm. Okay, nice. So, um, what lessons did you learn along your career, or especially lately, something that changed your mind?
Something that changed my mind. Uh, so I don't know. I think in terms of like expectations, or
Yeah, expectations when you're just going out of the degree or masters or starting.
so I would say that yeah, like one thing that I kind of learned in terms of how to think of, or how to uh, well, let's say, is basically the fact that everybody is, you know, just like you and me, or like there's nobody that's kind of unreachable, let's say. So you sometimes feel like there's, this guy that has published so many papers, and he's working at this super top company, and if I send an email to him or her, like they're never gonna reply to me or be interested in my
Okay.
questions or whatever. um and I
So don't be
think
afraid. Sorry.
yeah, exactly, not being afraid of contacting people, asking for yeah,
Okay.
can I do an internship with you, or can I I don't know, like
Yeah.
just ask. People will say no most of the time,
Yeah.
but sometimes they will say yes. um that's a little bit
I like that. Okay. Do you have an anecdote for me?
um an anecdote.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna, yeah, I'm not sure if it's completely related to the data science, but um when I was working in Satellogic, one of the so this is kind of to show that usually for people working with clients, the expectations of the clients are usually very, very far away
Okay.
from reality. So when you work with satellite imagery, as you can expect, the satellites are very, very, very far away from Earth. um, so basically, when you take pictures, you can see things, but you cannot see things in that great a detail, right? uh, but I remember that we were in a meeting with some clients, and they were asking us, we want to detect cars and so on, and that's like, okay, you can try and detect how many cars are there in a parking lot, and so on. And then there was a guy that asked, and how about reading the plates? And it's like, you're not sure how to answer that, right? Because it's like you don't want to downsell the capabilities of satellite images, but at the same time, it's like, come on, man, like how, like it's not
The
a
movies.
drone from the yeah, it's not the movies exactly. So yeah, that's a little bit
Okay. So let's move on. Now we have reviewed a bit your trajectory. I'd like you to explain a bit more. What's your area of expertise? How would you define it?
okay. So what I'm doing now, um so I still haven't found exactly my final uh, PhD topic, but what I've been working on lately is basically network pruning. So for those of you who are not that familiar with the topic, is the idea is basically, so if you've got an artificial neural network, which is basically a bunch of, like, it tries to mimic, the neurons of the brain. So you've got a lot of connections, and then the idea is that, for example, for computer vision, you will have an image on one side, and then you will propagate this information through the network, and then at the final layer of the network, you will have like, I don't know, like if you're trying to do classification, you will have, for example, 10 neurons, and then if neuron one is the one that's more active, then it means that the image would belong to class one or class two. So if the second neuron is the one more active, and so on, right? So the idea is tried, it's kind of inspired by neuroscience, right? And what we are trying to do with neural network pruning is um, to detect uh, which are the neurons that are contributing less to the network, right? So one of the things that we know about our brain, and it also happens the same with artificial neural networks, is that there's a lot of redundancy, meaning that there's a lot of neurons that you can just remove them with no effect or very very little effect to the way that the network works. So that's been actually an ongoing research field for a long time. But what people used to do initially was to uh, do this after the network has been trained. So by training a network, you basically show it a lot of images and you tell the network which is the class of the image. And then the network learns on its own how to change the connections inside it. Right. So once you have this network that is with all the connections set up, it's relatively easy, or at least intuitively, you could say that those connections that are weaker, in the sense that the weight of the connection in absolute value, in magnitude, is small, then that connection is not going to have a lot of impact on the network.
Mhm.
So then you remove it. So that's one way of doing it. But the main thing is that the paradigm for pruning was, first you take a network, you train it, and then once the network does what you want to do, um, then you see which are the less useful parts of the network, right? But what we are trying to do is to do this before training, right? So it's going one step further and say, okay, before I train the network, so before I know which parts of the network are going to be important, can I really say something about um, yeah, about the network? And it turns out that you can actually say a lot, um,
Mhm.
and like, of course, the performance is not as good as the methods that train the network first, for now, but still you can still it turns out that you can still remove a lot of connections from the network like what we say at initialization, so before training. um yeah, and that's more or less what I've been doing.
Okay, so how does that help?
Yeah, okay, so no, yeah, that's a fair question. So basically, I didn't mention, when you first train the network and then you prune it, what like the main point of pruning, well, there's basically two main points. So the first one is to reduce the memory use. So you have a model with a lot of neurons, so usually these models are quite big. You've got typically millions of neurons, or billions of neurons. So if you remove 90% of those connections, then you got a huge gain in memory.
Okay.
So that's one. And then the second one is that if there's connections that you just set to zero, then you don't need to take them into account when you do the predictions of images, right? So then you gain uh, velocity or
Yeah.
speed when you're doing inference. So that's the main point that you do pruning for. Now, if you do pruning at initialization, the good point about it is that you can have these benefits not only at inference time, but also when training the network. And usually when you train is like when you consume the most of the resources, right? Training a model is much more expensive than just doing inference.
Okay.
So then, like, that's one of the of yeah, of like the reasons why you would want to do pruning at initialization. And then there's another, from a more theoretical point of view, what's also interesting about pruning from before training is basically that you're asking yourself this question, right? Like, given an architecture, that you have not trained yet, so you don't know how much, like how well it will perform, or how much each component of the architecture will contribute to it, uh, can you say something about it, right? And it turns out that yes, you can say some things about, uh, let's say, the redundancy of the different parts of an architecture. So that's interesting, on its own. Uh,
Yeah, like philosophically.
yeah, well, I mean, yeah, to understand better how neural networks work and
Okay.
how to
And
design more efficient networks.
yeah. And one question that comes to my mind, if you have a simpler model or a less complex model, less weights,
Mhm.
should it generalize better? Do you get that or not?
Um, so we haven't done that many experiments on our particular research, but there's been some papers. Uh, Basically, both kind of happen. Let's say. So on the one hand, yes, it has been seen that less over parameterized models tend to generalize better. On the other hand, there's also some papers showing that when you prune a network for a task which is very fine grained, for example, for ImageNet classification challenge, which is you need to classify images in one of 1,000 classes, and you've got, for example, like, I don't know how many species of birds and dogs, um, which for humans would be very very difficult to tell the difference, or just
Oh,
know that this bird is from this species specifically. So that's what it's called, fine grained classification. So when you're trying to do these kind of things, pruning um, actually can be a bit harmful
okay.
for this. So overall, it might improve generalization, but if you remove too many parameters, then you're also, well, basically the network is losing capacity, right? So yeah,
Uh-huh.
you have to find the sweet spot, and it's so that's also a very interesting research problem, right? How can you find the sweet spot of the right amount of overfitting that you need to have uh, for a given problem?
Okay, so perhaps you could explain more. What are you looking for in a connection to drop it? What's
Mhm.
your main idea?
uh, okay, so um, basically, when you train a network, you want to you usually pose this as an optimization problem, um, and then this optimization problem has what we call a loss function or an objective function, which tells you, when you give a set of examples, how close is the prediction from the target prediction, right, from the label of the image. um, so that's the loss function. And then what we look at when we prune at initialization is basically, um, we're trying to infer if each of so for each of the connection, if we perturb that connection, um, like the magnitude of the connection, which is what you do when you train, how much does the loss change, right? So intuitively, what we want is to find all of the connections that when they are perturbed, the loss changes a lot. And the interesting thing about it is that you don't need to find the connections that when perturbed, they decrease the loss. So in the end, when you train, you want to decrease the loss. It turns out that the important connections are the ones that are able to change the loss, either making it big or making it small. And the intuition behind that is that when you train, you will make any connection go in the direction that you want. So the only thing that you care about is the fact that that connection is really linked with the output. So if I tune this knob, I know that something happens here. I don't care if it happens in the direction that I want it to happen. I just know that, this knob is important. Um,
Okay. It's like an important mapping.
hmm.
Okay, so um, one question that comes to my mind also is this approach that could it replace an expert designing an architecture? So is it better to try a huge neural network and then skeletonize it, or to directly design a smaller neural network with the same number of parameters?
Yes, so that's an interesting question. Um, so I think there's we have to differentiate between two things here. So one is, what it's recently been trending as well, which is neural architecture search. Um, so that is, I think, what you just asked. So how can we basically design an architecture that's, the best architecture for that particular task? Um, so that what happens with that is that it's very, very interesting, and well, some of the state of the art architectures that people are using now, like EfficientNet, has been designed with that. So that's a very powerful technique, but it's also very, very expensive, because in the end you need to train on a lot of data and try a lot of variations of architectures and so on. And pruning can be thought of, well, pruning no, but pruning at initialization can be thought of as as neural architecture search, but in a very constrained way. So in pruning or skeletonization, what you would have is you start with an overparameterized network, and then you're not changing the architecture, but you're just changing the inner topology of the network, right? So from the whole network, you will end up with a subnetwork, um, which will ideally work as well as the original one. So um, yeah, it could be thought of as well as neural architecture search. Mm.
Okay, and do you think your method is better than existing ones, or
Um, well, yes, that's
yeah?
what we are. I mean, what yeah, like the article that we recently submitted to a conference, what we basically explain is that um, the current methods that we're doing pruning at initialization were a bit fragile, in the sense that what they were doing is they were removing all of the connections of the network at once. Well, not all of them, but like 90% or 99% of the connections at once. Um, so what happens with that is that, so the way that we look for the change in the loss when we perturb a weight is what's called a gradient.
Mhm.
So we compute the gradient of the loss with respect to that parameter in particular. So the gradients of the parameters will change a lot when the network is dense, so originally, or after the network has been pruned, when you remove a lot of connections. Because in a way, all of the weights, are kind of, they
Random?
have some kind of interactions,
Okay.
right? Um, so basically, when you perturb one or you set one to zero, then it will also affect the others. Um, so what we found out is that when you try to go to high sparsities, so you try to remove a lot of weights at the same time, then these approximations are not very good. So instead, we suggested a variant of that approach where we remove the weights iteratively. And what we do is we recompute the importance of each of the connections at each step. So this way, the transition from the dense network to the prune network is much smoother, and well, it turns out, from empirically, that we can reach much better performance in the high sparsity settings. Um, when we don't prune that many connections, it's actually kind of similar. So the these initial methods are working well. But then when we push for higher sparsity, so we remove a lot of connections, um, yeah, then we are better.
Like, what percentage of connections do you remove?
So we're usually able to remove up to, well, so first of all, it depends on, the network. Like if the network is very big, then you're gonna be able to remove more connections. Also, how complex is the data set? But in general, we were able to remove up to 99.9% of the connections. So that's really a lot. So it's 1,000 times smaller, let's say.
Yeah.
Uh, and the network was still trainable. Of course, the performance is affected. But I really found, really surprising was that you could have a network like the same architecture, but not using like basically most of the connections, and still get a decent performance.
Mhm. And do you plan to use it in one of these huge neural networks there are now, like transformers, or like what's the biggest
Hmm.
network would you could think of and attack that?
Yeah, so well, right now we have tried um, to use it with ResNet 50, like it's and BGG19, which are kind of more standard architectures, because the idea, like the point of the paper is we want to show people that they can use it, right? Not, I
Right.
mean, of course, it's also interesting to apply it for transformers and so on. Um, and actually, I probably have some meetings with people regarding that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for now, we have been focusing more on computer vision and just standard networks that people use there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm obsessed with model interpretability. So maybe it will shed some light on what neural networks are learning, and what do you think?
Hmm. Uh, I think in general, neural network interpretability is quite hard.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think pruning is going in the direction of making them, more any more interpretable. But yeah, well, like the only thing I might say is that if you have less parameters, then it might be easier to kind of decode what the model is doing. So maybe in that aspect, yes, pruning could help in the sense that you reduce the complexity of the model. Mm. But yeah, I mean, in like per se, when you're doing pruning, you're just trying to remove things that are not contributing that much to the output, but you don't really understand what's the particular contribution of that or that thing. You just know that they contribute more or they contribute less. So yeah,
Okay. Well,
full
that's the
transparency.
point. What? Sorry.
Not just trying to be transparent. I'm saying full transparency.
Yeah. But many interpretability methods are just about pointing the parts that are important, not directly explaining all the causal connection. But yeah,
Yeah.
um, that's my opinion right there. So,
I mean, I'm not a big expert on interpretability, so you
yeah.
probably know better than me.
So what achievements do you consider like you wouldn't have imagined as a student?
Uh, well, so actually, yeah, like I remember when I started my undergraduate studies. You probably remember as well,
Yeah.
which is um, I mean, I didn't even think that I would manage to end up my my mathematics degree. So, for example, that part is already quite an achievement.
Okay,
No, but
that's good.
no, no. I mean, so yeah, no. I just want. Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting for people maybe doing their undergrad or just starting their masters or whatever. That um, yeah, like in every step, there's always a struggle, and you're always kind of unsure whether you're gonna make it or not. And then usually in the end, it ends up being fine.
Yeah.
Um, so that's well, that's what I try to tell myself whenever I have some doubts. Um, but yeah, so I mean, just finishing the double degree, then like of course getting that internship with Cordelia Schmidt, and then finally of course Oxford. I mean, that's yeah. When I look back, I think yeah, I never would have imagined that. Yeah.
Okay. Um, what's your opinion on data science today? Do you have um like I don't know, personal insight of what are the trends? Where is it going? Where is it going?
Uh, so I think data science is definitely uh, well, it has become, and it's still becoming more and more a central part of any industry. So
Hmm.
before, there was only a bunch of companies doing data science. Now everybody's kind of doing data science. Of
Yeah.
course, it's not the same level or the same you know yeah, let's say level of data science. So like a small bar or whatever is not gonna do or have the same needs as Google or Facebook. But I think people are realizing more and more that having some metrics and some measurements over some key parts of their business is really helping them to know what's going on, and to know if I change this, how does it affect the revenue if I change that, or these kind of things. um, so that's like, in general, that's what I think, that it's really something very useful and something that's gonna become more and more useful for more people. um, yeah, and then on the other hand, in terms of artificial intelligence, I think that's also uh, I think there's a lot of hype.
I think there's
Definitely,
hype.
there's a lot of hype from general public about what artificial intelligence can do. Like, I don't know, I think it's just in a way it's because of science fiction that people have seen you know Terminator, and have seen I don't know, Matrix, and all these movies, and then people just thinks of robots as something which are like much more intelligent than humans, and they're gonna take over the world or whatever, no? And then there's kind of a bit of hype, or people has unrealistic expectations. um yeah, but in a way, I do think that AI is really going to change society a lot. I mean, it already has, but it's gonna change it in even more meaningful ways.
There's room for more, you think?
Yeah, there's definitely room for more. I mean, if you think about deep learning, like deep learning as we know it, it really started in 2012, right?
Yeah.
And now it's everywhere, right? Like not everybody knows what deep learning is, but a lot of people knows a little bit that there's this thing called AI that's in their phones, and that makes images look better, and that is able to classify them in categories or these kind of things. So
So, what things do you think artificial intelligence cannot do that people think it can?
I mean, I guess it, yeah, I don't know. It So artificial intelligence. So one thing that is really interesting, for example, in terms of robotics, or like this image that we have of Terminator or whatever. Um,
Mm.
so we can create algorithms that are able to play chess or go, way better than most humans. And actually, well, there's been a lot of, you know, publicity about AlphaGo and AlphaZero and so on. Um, so that's actually easy for us to make. But then if you just Google, DARPA failures, then you will see a lot of robots trying to open a door and then falling on their side, or just driving a car and crashing everywhere. And so there's all these things that we take for granted, which is, I don't know, like walking, standing up, climbing a tree. These things are really, really super hard to achieve with a robot. Um, so there's, some things that apparently come supernatural to humans, um, and that's really hard to be able to program or to learn for a.
Hmm. But do you think we will get there?
I guess so. I mean, I think at some point, uh, so people, like with reinforcement learning, for example, there's really impressive progress with simulations, where you just have these kind of humanoid things. So you have some, physics, real world physics simulators, and you basically learn there through a lot of failures, and you learn to walk, for example, or you learn to jump, or a lot of things, no? But then the problem is that when you go from the simulator to, real life,
Hmm.
uh, that usually breaks. Um, so there's a domain adaptation problem. So that's a very important area of research. But more and more there's, new advancements in that regard. So I do think we will eventually get there. I cannot say when. No.
Okay. Okay. Now I have a question for you. You have some experience in research, and I want to pose a statement to you and ask you how do you align with it.
Mhm.
Um, okay, here it goes. There are so many published papers that research is losing value, or the quantity of papers diminishes uh, quality.
Uh,
What do you think? Maybe not.
so
I don't know.
What? Sorry?
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know.
No, no. I think like on its own, quantity does not uh, does not affect quality, but
Mhm.
what ends up happening,
Yeah.
is that okay.
Between
um
us.
yeah, what I do ends up happening is that there's this pressure for publishing now, because the problem is that everything's moving so fast, and especially in deep learning and machine learning, like this field where you are publishing in conferences, you go from one deadline to the next deadline, right? And in between, you have 3-4 months at most to improve the paper if it got rejected, or to think about a new project, and these kind of things. No, and what ends up happening is that um, you just do these short-term projects, and you just try to get rid of ideas as soon as possible, right? So
Okay.
it
In and
it kind
out.
of it kind of foments, this um, well, this type of research, like fast food research. Um, Still, there is very good papers, and there's still people that comes up with great ideas, and well, you just have to see how the move like how the field has progressed, right? So but yeah, I do agree partially with the statement, in the sense that there's just so many papers that like it's just overwhelming, right? For somebody starting, like actually myself, uh, if you want to learn about something about transformers or about like whatever, you start reading about the field, and there's just so many papers that you start being frustrated. You're frustrated from the start. And then of course, since there's so many people working on that, uh, you have one idea, and then you find three papers that have already
Oh,
implemented, right? So yeah, it's definitely getting tougher to do research, uh, and I do think that there's a need for changing a little bit the way that we evaluate research and the way that we think of research. Um, but I don't necessarily think that having a lot of papers is something bad. Um, yeah.
okay. That makes a lot of sense. Um, let's go back to the questions. Now a bit about your future. What's your next goal?
Well, getting a PhD.
Of course. Okay, then maybe let's go to after it. What do you see yourself doing after the PhD?
Oof. Well, to be honest, it's yeah, it's like when they would ask you, what after you finish mathematics and physics? Of course, you just want to finish, Um, I mean, I don't know. I think I would like probably to continue doing research. I am not 100% sure I will want to stay in academia and end up being, a professor. And particularly in my field, well, like deep learning and so on, like there's so many researchers in companies. Um, so I basically I'm like my goal after finishing the DPhil would be to either find a good postdoc or find a good position as a basically as a research scientist, um, in some of the good companies, let's say.
Yeah, okay. So is it an industry PhD or fully research?
Uh, I think so. I think every country or university is a bit different. So I would say, so my PhD is gonna be funded by a company.
Okay.
Um, so again, the funds will come from this company uh, because, or partially because, I met. So the one of the co-advisors that's gonna be one of the persons that's going to be a co-advisor during my PhD is was my advisor from the masters, right? So getting in touch with that person is what later helped me uh, find this funding for the PhD, right? And eventually getting accepted and everything. So um, yeah, so that's kind of an industrial PhD, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. So, what advice would you give someone
Hmm.
starting?
So
What has worked for you?
I would say that, yeah, I mean, it's really hard to give a recipe for
Yeah.
success. And honestly, I wouldn't say anything in particular worked for me. So it was a combination of luck and, I guess, hard work. um so as I said before, I would say that what, like, the tipping point or the lucky moment was when I got that internship with a very good lab in France. Mm, like, what did work for me to get there? So I don't know, 30% luck, and then 70% the fact that I did have good grades of my first semester in the master's. So I mean, of course, I did work hard to get into the master's and to get good grades into the master's, and I think that for sure played a role. um, but then, I don't know, the fact that we got along with that person. I don't know, I just decided to ask them, like, I wasn't sure even if I should take that internship, right? But in the end, I said, okay, let's try that. uh,
Okay. So to finish, I'm gonna ask you to recommend us a book or a source of knowledge. Um, do you have anything in mind?
so maybe I'm going to be to give like the main, like, that what everybody is already looking at. But basically, I what I really started with, when I really started with machine learning, I started with Andrew Ng. uh, he's got a course in Coursera, and now he actually made a different website, which is deeplearning.ai, and he has even expanded much more. So I first watched his videos about machine learning, but classic machine learning. So he was explaining super vector machines, linear
Okay.
regression, these things which are kind of very basic, but they are very helpful to understand the basic concepts of machine learning. And then, of course, uh, yeah, I think those videos are very, very interesting for someone who wants to learn more about machine learning and deep learning.
Okay. And where can we find you or your work? Do you have a project that has some link we can give in the description to find you?
um, so I guess you could link to my LinkedIn, I guess.
Just LinkedIn? Okay, that's fine.
uh, yeah, I mean, I don't have a personal website or
Or published work.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I can yeah, I can send you the submission, the link to my archive submission.
Okay. So yeah, this will be it. Now later I'm going to ask you to recommend me 2 people tops to interview next.
Mhm.
And thank you a lot for coming in and spreading the knowledge of your expertise. I hope we all learned something today. So see you soon.
Okay, see you. Thank you.